the corruption that I believe we can say with confidence is occurring at the Secretary of State level, and I have evidence to back that up. I just want to introduce you to 3 people before I get into this. It's a little bit complicated, but there's Maggie Toulis-Oliver, our Secretary of State. She was a former Democrat operative, so she was a former employee at some of these NGOs that are currently under scrutiny for their association with the ballot trafficking mules. And then Alex Curtis is the communications director. He's also a former Democrat operative associated with some of these people that you're going to I think it's quite interesting. And then Catherine Clark, she, during the 2020 election, she was a candidate for the county clerk in Santa Fe County. She was a current Democrat operative at the time. She owned a company that ran, they made field plans for candidates, for Democrat candidates, and she was a current Democrat official. She was an elected official in the Santa Fe County Democrat Party. Next. So that Alex Curtis gentleman, here's some of the NGOs he's been associated with. The one I want to point out right now is the Center for Civic Policy. He was working there at the same time that the Center for Civic Policy was assisting Rock the Vote to get that backdoor access to our voter rolls. And I'm just going to go over that real quick. Next slide. So these are the emails that we got through an IPA request. It starts off with Jen Tolatino of Rock the Vote sending the Secretary of State a request to have access to her OVR system that's the same as they have in Pennsylvania and Virginia. And if you go to their website, they actually explain what that is, and it appears that they have right access to the rolls in Pennsylvania. It was proven in Pennsylvania that they actually had IP addresses were pinging their database. Next. And Maggie says, oh, we'll reach out back to you. And then this Melanie Aranda starts to assist Rock the Vote. She's a Center in Civic Policy, and continuing to ask the Secretary of State, we need this access. Can you give it to us? Is it ready yet? And then the Secretary of State says, I will give you a call shortly so we can discuss what is available to you that should meet your needs. So they take this conversation out of writing and onto the phone, which I would do too if I was aware of IPRA and I was about to give a third party enhanced access that other people don't have to the voter registration rolls. Next slide, please. So just to remind you, Rock the Vote shares their OVR platform with 1,198 other partners. We have no idea who these partners are. We have an idea of who one of these partners are, and that's going to come up shortly. Next slide, please. So here's Rock the Vote associated with Center for Tech and Civic Life. And you've probably heard Center for Tech and Civic Life is the organization that Mark Zuckerberg started, who distributed those drop boxes throughout this country, spent $300 million to privately change fundamentally how we vote across the country. And they're associated with Rock the Vote. So it's possible that Center for Tech and Civic Life, as well as all these other giants, have access and share that OVR platform.
And for purposes of New Mexico, $4.2 million was allocated for those drop boxes, and I believe you have one here present in Otero County. Two.
Next slide, please. Okay, so what I wanted to get into now that I have that introduction, Alex Curtis is tied to NGOs, Rock the Vote, and that Center for Civic Life. He was involved in all of that stuff to give those third parties this enhanced access. And one of the things I discovered through our IPRA requests were that Maggie and Alex sent some strange emails on Election Day. So Alex is currently the communications director for the Secretary of State, and what that job entails is he writes press releases and he writes Facebook posts. He's not technical. Theoretically, he probably doesn't have his hands in the data. He's not running elections. He's writing Facebook posts. So that's what makes what I'm about to show you very strange. So there were 5 emails sent between these people. The first was at 11 a.m. on Election Day. 8 a.m. on Election Day, 11 a.m. And then there were 2 very close together. There was one at 3:18 p.m. And Maggie said, this is a just for me, just now report in that email. And then 12 minutes later, she sends what she called the official numbers 12 minutes later. And then there was a 7 p.m. report. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So what was in those emails? This is the first one that was sent. This is the 8 a.m., 8:20. It originates with Alex Curtis, again, Facebook post writer. But he, for some reason, is sending the Secretary of State the ballot counts for the entire state. So Otero County's in there. All our counties are in there. It has the total ballot counts, and then it has all the counties broken out by their party. Okay, and then he sends that to the Secretary of State, Maggie Toulos Oliver. Maggie Toulos immediately sends it to Catherine Clark. So who is Catherine Clark? If you could go to the next slide, please. I mentioned her earlier, but she is not an employee of the state. She has no business getting ballot counts, her own personal ballot counts. In fact, at the time that she was receiving these reports, she was president of Blue Suede Strategies. This is her LinkedIn page. This is her own testimony of what she was doing at the time, where it looks like she wrote campaign plans and strategy and field plans and operations. Okay, she was also chair of the finance committee for the Democrat Party, so she was a Democrat official at the time. Next slide. So what was in the report? So I told you it was ballot counts for all of the counties. Theoretically, this is coming from the poll books. We know that they're all connected to the internet. And for some reason, they're being aggregated together. And Catherine Clark, not a state employee, but a Democrat official and candidate herself, she was on the ballot, is getting her own personal copies. So here's what it looks like when you graph the data that was in those poll book reports. And you'll notice, most likely on election day, you expect, obviously, people to come in throughout the day, and the numbers are going to increase throughout the day, and then by 7 p.m., you're going to have everybody who is going to vote on election day has voted, and then you're up to 100%. Now, you'll notice, go to the next slide, please, there's a couple of strange ones, and I'm just going to pull out the strange ones for you. So we have 2 counties that lost votes on election day. Santa Fe had 70% of their votes cast by 11 o'clock, and then they all went away. So in the 3:30 reports, there's 0 ballots in Santa Fe County. San Juan County lost a whole bunch of votes also. So they were near 60% cast, and then they went down to 20. And then they somehow magically regained those votes that were gone. If I was the Santa Fe County clerk and I'm getting these personal poll book reports from the Secretary of State and I saw my county's votes go to 0, they should be saying something about that to each other. They should be, what's going on with these numbers? But there's no surprise that this is happening. So that's another odd thing. And then you have those 2 that were really, really close together, just 12 minutes apart, and you can see those dots that are close together. Just 12 minutes between the creation of the reports, and you have massive gains in some of these counties that really aren't possible. That San Juan County could have had a 20% of their people vote in a 12-minute period, but that's what these poll books show. And recall that she said one was a just for her report and one was official. So I wonder what's the difference between a just for Maggie report and the official report, and how you have massive increases in some of these counties in a 12-minute period. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the absentee ballots, because those poll book reports had all types of voting in it. So it had early voting, it had absentee, and then it had election day. So this is just looking at absentee ballots. It's a little confusing. Most of the absentee ballots should have been in by election day. You really don't expect that 6% increase in the county on the bottom to happen. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to pull out the weird ones for you again. So you recall Santa Fe lost votes in election day. Well, they also lost absentee votes. I wonder how that happened. And then McKinley lost a few votes. It's kind of hard to tell, but it did decrease a little bit, and then it went up again. And then you've got all these other counties that had very large increases in that 12-minute period, which really probably aren't possible, because most counties, they get a mail delivery on election day, and then they get all their drop boxes that come in at the end of election day, but you're not necessarily going to have a 10% increase or whatever in a 12-minute period in your entry into the poll book. So it makes no sense. Next slide. Okay, so that's those poll book reports that were given directly to the Democrat Party. I don't think any other candidate or party were given that. preview to what was going on with the ballot counts. But this was a weird email too. It was sent a couple days after the election, and Maggie was asking for the final numbers of votes cast, and Alex sends her this totally bogus list of numbers. So if you compare these numbers right here to the official report that she published, they're off by tens of thousands of ballots. So he claimed that the same-day voter registration was 11,000 people, but if you look at the actual data, there's 19,000 people were registered during early voting on Election Day. And then if you look at the absentee ballot count, he told her there was 11,000 more than the official number, and then early person was 10,000 more. Election Day was shy. So where did those votes go? It's like there's all these sets of numbers that are always changing, and certain people have access to them. How can they be changing like this? And this affects Otero County because this is your Secretary of State doing these things and sending this data outside of her office. So Alex was off by 50,000 votes. Again, what is Alex Curtis, Facebook post writer, doing with these numbers anyway? Next. So just to aggregate it all together for you real quick, this is too much information on one slide, but on the right there's the 7 p.m. vote count, the ballot counts that she was emailing to Catherine Clark, and then on the left side you have the official canvas. That means what she claims were the final numbers. And going from the 7 p.m. vote count to the official canvas is, in some counties, absolutely bogus. Like McKinley gained 220% over the 7 p.m. number to the official canvas. That means somehow the poll books at the end of Election Day doubled the number of people that voted by the time she had given her final numbers. How does this happen? Like, you expect some change because there are some trickling absentee ballots that come in at the end, the drop boxes get delivered, maybe everything is entered into the poll books right at 7 p.m., but it should not be 100, you shouldn't be doubling the number of voters that voted on Election Day, but we see that happened. Otero's numbers were actually pretty reasonable, and we talked about, some of what those were, and it looked reasonable from what Robin remembered happening. But your Secretary of State is doing some screwy things here. Next slide. So we talked about that you are affected by other counties. You're affected by what your Secretary of State does. You're affected by unethical things she's doing with her ties to these people that work at these NGOs. You're also affected by Doña Ana County. So this is a picture out of Doña Ana County. I went and I did a analysis of all of their chain of custody documents for their absentee ballots. And I just plotted, here's what they claim came in to their office, here's what they transferred to their absentee board, and then here's what the final numbers were. So if you take what they claim came into their office, they can account for over 8,000 ballots that came into their office. There are 8,100 and something ballots off. Now, a friend of mine in Doña Ana County, she is very active in poll watching and stuff, and she went to the county warehouse one day during early voting, and she saw this box outside the county warehouse. And then she took a picture of what she saw when she peered in that little slot. This is a huge box. It probably holds, just judging by, the piles of envelopes I've seen by now, this probably holds 3,000 to 5,000 absentee ballots. She peered in there. It's brimming to the top with those things. This is not a drop box location. There was no surveillance of this. This is not, this is a warehouse out in the middle of like the boonies of Doña Ana County. Hardly anybody knows this is here, yet somehow probably 5,000 ballots were stuffed in there and outside the chain of custody, because there is no chain of custody for this particular location. So just thinking about your Ricky Little, William Madrid race that affects Otero County, here's 8,000 ballots. We don't know where they came from. When you transfer those, when she has her chain of custody to transfer to the absentee board, there's 146, no, there was 200 that she held on to till the day after the election. 200. And there's no reason to hold on to 200 ballots to the absentee board, because the farthest drive in Doña Ana County is probably 45 minutes away. So she had everything well before the absentee ballot, or the absentee board quit for the night. But she held on them for some reason, and it could have to do with that race that you share a district with Otero County. And then when you look at all the absentee ballots that were transferred to the canvassing, or the board, the absentee board, there's 146 tacked onto that number in the official results. And so I think it's highly likely that the actions of Doña Ana County affected that race here in Otero County.
But also those could have been provisionals that were added on at the end. And that box that was filled with those might have been done that way because that was all of the absentee ballots that came in and they were just put in that box to get them to the warehouse. I mean, there's different
This was sitting outside a warehouse all by itself, no surveillance. I don't know why you would make excuses for...
I'm just giving suggestions because I know different
Okay,
things
well,
that we...
then there should be chain of custody.
And that's what we're given too, but these are a little bit more factual and backed up a little bit more than just, you know.
I don't think there's any excuse for chain of custody not to exist for 8,000 ballots in a county.